What's up, YouTube? I'm back. It's been a minute. It's already December. It's been like a month since my last upload, and I am sorry. I promise I'm going to get better at uploading on here more frequently. While we're talking about the channel just hit 100 subs, which is absolutely awesome. So if you are one of those subscribers, thank you. Keep being awesome. If you're not, hit the button. I put a poll up on Instagram the other day trying to figure out as far as what my next video would focus on. And the two choices for the poll were jig fishing tips and top fall baits. And top fall baits won, so that's what we're going to talk about. And if you're in the boat I am, fishing is slow right now, but fishing is still fishing. So with the fall, there's a couple ways I like to go as far as baits that I know are going to help me put fish in the kayak. So I'm going to be talking about 5 of those. As far as an actual order for a countdown, I can't put them in order, it's too hard. But I am going to show you 5 baits that I know will help you catch fish as the weather cools down, as the water temps drop, and these fish kind of start shifting around from going really shallow when fall first started to kind of creeping their way back to their winter spots and how we can find them. So let's look at the first bait. All right, so no better place to start than talking about some crankbaits. First one, this is one of my favorite style of baits, and it's a square bill crankbait. And as you can see, it earns its name. It's got a little square bill on the front. And these are gonna work really well in about the 3 to 5 foot range. Why I like a square bill, you get a really tight wobble with it, and it's awesome for drawing a reaction strike. And when I first started using these, I was really cautious about where I would throw them, so I wouldn't fling it up around a lot of brush. But I'm telling you, throw them in brush, because what's going to happen, it's going to pop that brush and deflect, and when it does, that's where you're going to get a lot of bites. So don't be afraid about hanging up with these. They're honestly a lot better than you would think about not getting stuck. The second style, lipless crankbait, and a couple things just different action-wise. These are going to draw a lot of reaction strikes. These, you can do a couple of different things that you can't do with a square bill. A square bill, if you throw it, it's going to want to float until you begin that reeling action. This is a slow falling sinking lure. So if you want to throw it out and let it fall a little bit, you're going to get some wobble and it's going to look like a dying bait fish. So where you're pulling reaction strikes with these guys, you can actually kind of talk a fish into biting with this by throwing it out and just letting it fall for a minute. You can have fish in the area actually pursue these. And as far as the retreat goes, you can burn them really low or up on the surface. You can let them fall mid-range, or you can even yo-yo them. So a lot of cool stuff you can do with a lipless. And lastly, and you can kind of tell by the bill of this guy, he's going to dive down farther than any of these. This one covers about the 6 to 9 foot range. And these are really good for when those bass kind of start to suspend. Because once again, reaction strike, you can put it right in front of their face. And for fall transition, guys, mimicking bait fish is key because these dudes are trying to get fat. They're trying to eat everything they can before it gets super cold and shuts it down for the winter. So let's go to bait number 2. Bait number 2 is a popular one. It's made by Z-Man. You probably already know where I'm going when you hear that name, but it's a chatterbait. Admittedly, up until this year, I hated throwing chatterbaits. Simple reason, I didn't catch fish on them. Like I would clown with my friends like those things don't work, they're a ripoff, and then I would watch people on YouTube just absolutely murder fish with them. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to give them another shot. And what I figured out is I was limiting the capabilities of this guy. And there are a lot of them. One of the most versatile lures you could possibly have in your tackle box. And what I mean by I was limiting is I would throw it out and just work it like any other vertical jig. And some days that's exactly what the fish want. But others, you can get a whole lot of action on these by reeling them in and letting this bait swim. Another technique I really like with a chatterbait, and it's good for the fall when they're up shallow, is throw it up around cover and just give it a rip and then pause before you start that retrieve. You're going to get a lot of action on a chatterbait. If you're on the fence with one, I was there. keep playing with it. And when you tie one on, before you're just like, oh, okay, the fish don't want that, I'm gonna change to something else, change your retrieve. You can burn these things, you can throw them mid-range, you can kind of do more of like a swim jiggy bounce with it, or you can just jig them. So play with it, see what the fish want, because I guarantee you on more days than not, you can find what the fish want without ever changing your lure. So fall bait essential for sure, chatterbait. If you are a chatterbait person, I want you to sell me in the comments as far as why I need to splurge and spend the extra money on the jackhammer, because I have not. So hit me with your best pitch on that. Let's go to the next bait.
Oh yeah! Whoa! Look at that, Avery. You want to hold him? I'll show you how to hold one of these, okay?
So this bait actually has a little soft spot for me because it's one that got me into bass fishing. Because it's one of the first lures that targets bass that I was actually able to catch fish on, and that is a spinnerbait. Spinnerbaits are absolutely certified fall killers. For me, this one has a willow blade, and it's also got the little Colorado blade up here too. Blade preference is all on you, and it really doesn't matter that much is what I've seen. Some people are very picky on, oh, I only like this type of blade. They all do the same stuff, man. Just throw them out, reel it, almost like the chatterbait. See what type of retrieve they want, because these are very versatile. And I'm talking about them with a fall bait, but these things can actually be really, really good winter baits if you slow roll them. So like I was saying with the chatterbait, don't put a spinnerbait on and go 5 casts and say, oh, it's not working. Change your retrieve up. Anything that's going to mimic a bait fish and you get that flash with the blades that look like a school of bait fish going by is going to get you bit in the fall. Spinnerbaits are awesome for that. The next bait is one I put on anytime the bite is hard. That can be spring, summer, fall, whenever. If I'm having a hard time getting bit, I'm going to this bait, or this technique rather. That's a shaky head. And what I mean by a shaky head is if you're not using one, it has this head on the front and it lets it stand like this on the bottom. They're usually flat on the bottom to get that standing action. It's got a screw lock on it to put your bait on. And one of my favorite plastics to throw on a shaky head is just a big, long finesse worm like this. And what a shaky head's gonna do, it's a finesse technique, so you wanna throw it and let it get all the way down there and just sit right there, head on the bottom, tail up in the air. I like the finesse worms because this is gonna sit and get a lot of action. And with a shaky head, really what you're gonna wanna do is just give some subtle twitches and just let it sit there. This is not a searching bait. This is more of a targeting bait. Like, okay, I have a feeling, or if you have electronics, I don't have electronics right now, but if you're like, I feel like that brush pile is holding fish, throw it up there and let it sit. This is not one to kind of try to find the fish on. This is where, when you've got that feeling there are fish there, I'm gonna work this thing slow and try to get a bite. Shaky heads are really, really good for me. Like I said, when nothing else is working, I'm gonna put it on. So like I was saying, with the fall bite being particularly slow right now, I'm having those days where I'm like, man, I'm just not getting bit. I'm gonna put the shaky head on. And it came through for me the other day too. I went out and pulled about 2.5 hours and 32 degrees on the kayak. They just weren't feeling anything, went with the shaky head, ended up landing 2, which isn't amazing, but once again, I know that the shaky head can find me fish if I'm struggling to do it any other way. All right, last fall bait I want to talk about, and it's a go-to for me year-round. I absolutely love throwing them, and that is a jig. It can really help in the fall once they kind of start going back down to the bottom, because if you're using all these other baits and not finding them, you can kind of bet, okay, they're low. So with the jig, there are 3 different styles I want to show you, and this is a football jig. And you can kind of see, this is actually the gridiron jig. I got it in a mystery tackle box. but they're very rounded and bulky up top. This would be more of a flipping jig, which as you can see, they're usually triangular and almost a little flattened on one side. And then you have a swim jig, which is going to be very narrow in the front to give it that swimming and gliding action. And there are different purposes for all of them. Football jigs are really good for me. If I am working rock ledges, I like a football jig because I know it's going to get down there quickly and I know it is going to stay on the bottom. And the reason I like it with rock wedges is I like to work each level of it. And that's the main thing with a jig. You want to work it slowly. The goal is to feel the bottom every time you move the bait. So football jigs are really good when you're fishing kind of more open water or certain structures on the bank rather than fishing cover. The flipping jig I showed you, this is your cover guy. And the triangular head lets it deflect off more cover and avoid getting hung up to where the bulky head of the football jig is going to get you hung up, which is pretty frustrating. And the swim jig, I like these to work when I'm working things like my spinnerbait and just not getting bit, because you can work a swim jig very similarly, but it's a lot more subtle than a spinnerbait. So if they're a little lethargic or so forth, a swim jig can come through for you where maybe the spinnerbait is just looking a little too much for them on a day where they're not very active. All right, guys, there you have it. That's what I've been throwing around this fall. If I left something off that you feel like is an essential fall bait technique, throw it in the comments. I would be glad to check it out, maybe do a review. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time. Take it easy.